You know, the funny thing about getting old is that people start to see you as invisible. You become part of the furniture. A nice, quiet old man who smiles and nods and doesn't cause any trouble.
They forget you had a whole life before the gray hair and the comfortable shoes. They forget you might still have a mind like a steel trap. They forget that before you were just Gregory, you were a man who knew how to follow the money. And money, it always leaves a trail. My name is Gregory. I'm 75 years old. My wife Clara passed on about 5 years ago, and the silence in our little house got to be too much for me. So I started volunteering. Down at the Northwood Senior Center, a place full of life and stories and most importantly paperwork. Piles of it.
Government forms are a language all their own, designed, I suspect, by people who've never had to fill one out in a moment of desperation. I spent 40 years as a federal auditor. I speak that language fluently, so I became the center's unofficial translator, helping my friends and neighbors navigate the bureaucratic maze for things like housing benefits, medical assistance, things that meant the difference between staying in their homes and not. It gave me purpose. When you help someone like Eleanor Gable, a woman with hands so gnarled by arthritis, she can barely hold a pen, secure the subsidy that lets her keep the little apartment where she raised her kids, you feel like you've done something good. You see the relief wash over her face, a wave of gratitude that's worth more than any paycheck I ever earned. I was content. Life was small, but it was good. And then the letters started coming. The first one was for a gentleman named Arthur Henderson, a proud man, a veteran who still stood a little too straight, as if at attention. He came to my little desk in the corner of the rec room, his face pale. He slid a letter across the table. It was from the county benefits office. Application for housing assistance. Denied. The reason was a single curt line. Form incomplete. I took the letter and looked at the copy of the application I'd kept. I remembered filling it out with Arthur. We'd spent 2 hours on it. We'd double-checked every line, every box, every signature. It was pristine. I told him it had to be a mistake. A simple clerical error. We would file an appeal. He nodded, but the light in his eyes had dimmed. A week later, Eleanor Gable came to me with the exact same letter. Denied. Incomplete form. Same signature at the bottom, a crisp, arrogant loop that spelled out M.M. Hayes. Now, too, is a coincidence. But I'm an auditor. My entire career was built on the premise that there's no such thing as a coincidence when it comes to paperwork. I started asking around, quietly. By the end of the month, I had a full dozen of my clients, all with the same story. Denied. Incomplete forms. Signed M.A.s. It felt off. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. This wasn't a series of mistakes. This was a pattern. This was a wall. It was bureaucratic stonewalling of the highest order, a tactic I'd seen used 100 times in my career, to frustrate, to delay, and to make people give up. But these people couldn't afford to give up. This wall wasn't just blocking an application, it was pushing them out of their homes. A cold, familiar anger began to smolder in my chest. Mr. Hayes had built a wall. He just didn't realize he'd built it in front of a man who'd spent his entire life learning how to tear them down, brick by painstaking brick. The days that followed were some of the hardest I've experienced since Clara died. The denial letters weren't just pieces of paper. They were eviction notices in slow motion. The weight of them settled over the senior center like a physical shroud. The cheerful chatter in the rec room was replaced with hushed, worried conversations. Every time the mail cart rattled down the hall, you could feel a dozen people hold their breath. Eleanor Gable was the one who broke my heart. She found me by the coffee machine, clutching a second letter. This one wasn't a denial. It was a formal notice to vacate from her landlord. Her subsidy had been officially terminated. Her hands, the ones I'd helped guide across the signature line, were shaking so badly she could barely hold the paper. She wasn't crying, which was somehow worse. Her eyes were just wide and vacant, like someone who'd been struck and didn't know where the blow came from. She looked at me, her voice a fragile whisper. "Gregory, what did I do wrong? I tried so hard to do it right." I put my hand on her shoulder, a gesture that felt utterly inadequate. I told her she'd done nothing wrong. I told her the system was broken, but all I could see was the sheer brutal unfairness of it. Here was a woman who'd worked her whole life, paid her taxes, raised a family, and now in her twilight years she was being thrown out of her home because of a lie. Because some faceless bureaucrat had scrawled a signature on a piece of paper. The word incomplete echoed in my head. Incomplete. It was an insult, a dismissal. It was a way of saying that she, Eleanor, was not enough, that her life's ledger didn't balance in her favor. A few days later, Arthur Henderson stopped by to say goodbye. He'd packed up his small apartment. His son was driving in from Ohio to pick him up. This man, who'd faced down enemy fire in his youth without flinching, couldn't even meet my eyes. He just stared at the worn linoleum floor of the center. "It's for the best, I suppose," he said, his voice gravelly. "Never liked the winters here anyway." We both knew it was a lie. He loved his little garden, his weekly poker game, his whole life here. He was being exiled. He shook my hand, a firm, dry grip that still had the strength of a much younger man. "Thanks for trying, Gregory. You're a good man." And then he was gone. I sat at my desk for a long time after he left, the silence of the room pressing in on me. The anger I'd felt before was gone, replaced by something colder, heavier. It was a feeling of profound responsibility. I had helped these people. I had told them to trust the process. I had vouched for the system, and the system in the form of Mr. Hayes had betrayed them. It had betrayed me. My mind drifted back, years and years, to a stuffy conference room in a federal building. I was in my 40s, hungry, and I was staring down a man named Peterson, the director of a regional pension fund. It was the Oakwood pension scandal, the case that made my career. Peterson was smooth, silver-haired, impeccably dressed. He looked more like a senator than a thief. He'd been systematically denying partial disability claims from retired factory workers, citing complex and obscure procedural violations, tiny errors in filing dates, a missing middle initial, a form signed in the wrong color ink. For 3 years he'd been sweeping the unclaimed funds, millions of dollars, into a discretionary account that he and his cronies used for executive retreats and performance bonuses. I remember the look on his face when I laid out the evidence, the spreadsheets, the flowcharts, the timelines. It wasn't a dramatic courtroom confession. It was a quiet, suffocating avalanche of facts. His condescending smile slowly dissolved, replaced by a waxy, slack-jawed panic. He thought no one was watching. He thought the numbers were too small, too scattered, too boring for anyone to piece together. He thought the victims were too powerless to fight back. He was wrong. I looked at the stack of denial letters on my desk. Denied. Incomplete. Signed, M. Hayes. The same arrogance. The same contempt for the little people. The same belief that no one was watching. Clara, my late wife, used to call it my crooked number sense. She'd watch me poring over ledgers at the kitchen table late at night, a cup of tea cooling beside me. She'd say, "You get a look on your face, Greg, like a hound that's caught a scent." She always knew when I was onto something. And in the quiet of that senior center, I could almost hear her voice, a gentle whisper in my memory. "Go get him, Greg. Someone has to." The final push came a week later, and it came in a cardboard box. A young woman I didn't recognize came to the center, her eyes red-rimmed. She introduced herself as Maria, the granddaughter of a man named George Petroselli. George had been one of my clients. His application had been denied by Hayes 3 months ago. We'd filed an appeal, but George had passed away from a sudden heart attack before the hearing could be scheduled. Maria handed me the box. "Grandpa wanted you to have this," she said. "It's his chess set. He said you were the only one who could ever give him a real game. I was speechless. I took the box, the worn wooden set inside rattling softly. As I was thanking her, she paused. Oh, and this was in his mail. I don't know what it is. She handed me a letter from her purse. It was from the county benefits office. From M. Hayes. I opened it, expecting another sterile denial, but it was different. It was a notification. It stated that because the appeal process was not completed, George Petroselli's previously allocated housing benefits for the prior fiscal quarter were now officially forfeited due to being unclaimed. My blood ran cold. Every cell in my auditor's brain screamed at once. Unclaimed. That was the word. The magic word. In government accounting, that word is a doorway. Denied benefits, if successfully appealed, are paid out. But funds that are unclaimed or forfeited, they don't just vanish back into the general treasury. Not usually. They're often swept into a different kind of account, a discretionary fund, an off-book ledger, a slush fund. Peterson, the pension thief, had built his entire scheme on that one word. I looked from the letter to the chess set in my hands. George Petroselli, a good man, a decent man, dead. And this vulture, Hayes, was not just denying him. He was picking over the bones, claiming the money that should have housed him in his final months as forfeited. That was it. The tumblers in my mind clicked into place. The grief, the anger, the frustration, it all coalesced into a single diamond-hard point of resolve. This was no longer just about helping my friends. This was about justice. It wasn't about revenge, not at first, but sitting there, holding a dead man's chess set and a thief's letter. I have to admit, the lines started to get blurry. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. Mr. Hayes had balanced his books with the dignity and survival of my friends. I decided right then and there that I was going to conduct one last audit, and I was going to make damn sure he paid every last cent. The first rule of an audit is that you don't announce you're coming. You don't walk in the front door and ask the fox to show you where he's hiding the chickens. You gather your information quietly, from the outside, until you have a case so airtight that by the time you do walk in, it's already over. Mr. Hayes was the gatekeeper of his own little kingdom. Going to him, or even his direct superiors, who likely saw him as an efficient manager keeping costs down, would be a fool's errand. They'd circle the wagons, shred documents, and I'd be dismissed as a meddling old man. No, I had to build my case from public records. The Freedom of Information Act, or its state-level equivalent, was a beautiful thing. It was a crowbar for citizens. It allowed you to pry open the closed doors of bureaucracy, as long as you knew exactly which doors to pry. The process is slow, tedious, and designed to discourage you. They can deny your requests for being too broad, too vague, or for 1,000 other reasons. But I knew the game. I knew how to ask questions they were legally required to answer. My kitchen table, once the site of family dinners and Clara's endless craft projects, was transformed back into my old command center. I set up my laptop, a legal pad, and a fresh pot of coffee. The first thing I did was call Frank. Frank and I came up together in the Federal Auditing Service. We were the young guns once, the thorns in the side of corrupt contractors and lazy bureaucrats. Now he was retired in Arizona, spending his days perfecting his golf swing and complaining about the heat. I got him on his cell phone as he was walking off the 9th hole. "Gregory, to what do I owe the pleasure? Don't tell me you want to talk about the good old days again," he boomed. I laid it all out for him. The seniors, the denials, the signature, the word unclaimed. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head over the phone, even 1,000 miles away. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he whistled, a low, sharp sound, a slush fund built on denied benefits. "That's an old-school move, Greg. Gutsy." Then his tone shifted. "It's also dangerous. This guy Hayes, he's a county official. He's got friends. You go poking this hornet's nest. You're liable to get stung. You're 75, my friend. Are you sure you want this fight? Frank, I said calmly. Eleanor Gable is sleeping on her daughter's couch. Arthur Henderson is in Ohio. This isn't a choice. He sighed. He knew me too well. All right, all right. Don't get your blood pressure up. So you're going the public records route. Smart. But you have to be surgical. Don't ask for all documents related to spending. They'll bury you in paper or deny it as overly burdensome. You need to ask for specifics. Give me a minute. I heard him sit down, the clink of ice in a glass. Okay, round one. You want three things. First, the approved departmental budget for Hayes's office for the last 3 fiscal years. Second, a complete list of all vendor payments over, say, $500 from that department. Third, and this is the important one, request all records pertaining to the creation and governance of any unclaimed benefits reclamation account or discretionary forfeiture fund established by that department. It was perfect, specific, bounded, and that last request was the silver bullet. I was asking for the map to the treasure chest. Thanks, Frank, I said, scribbling notes. I owe you one. Just promise me you'll be careful, he said. And call me when the first batch of documents comes in. This is more interesting than golf, anyway. My next step was trickier. I needed a logistical ally, someone who understood the labyrinthine filing system of the county government. Frank's advice was strategic, but I needed tactical support. I thought of Maria, George Petroselli's granddaughter. She'd mentioned she worked for the county. A quick search of the public employee directory told me where the county clerk's office, the very office that processed and archived the kind of documents I was looking for. I knew approaching her was a risk, both for me and for her. I didn't want to put her job in jeopardy. I found her on her lunch break, sitting on a bench in the park across from the courthouse. I didn't lead with the investigation. I started by talking about her grandfather, about the chess games we used to play. I told her how much I missed him. Her eyes softened. Then I shifted, carefully. Maria, I'm trying to understand some of the county's procedures. I'm an old man, and the way things are done now, it's all confusing. I've been filing some public records requests, and I feel like I'm speaking a different language. She was instantly wary. What kind of requests? Just about budgets. Departmental spending, for the benefits office. Her posture stiffened. She knew exactly which department that was. That's Mr. Hayes's department. You need to be careful there. He's influential. I'm just a citizen trying to get some clarity, I said, keeping my voice level and calm. I decided to take a small leap of faith. Your grandfather's last letter, the one about the unclaimed funds, that didn't sit right with me. It didn't seem fair. That was the key. Her grandmother had also been a client at the center. She knew the stories. She'd seen the fear in the eyes of her own family's friends. Her professional caution warred with her personal sense of justice. I could see the conflict on her face. Finally, she let out a long breath. I can't get you any documents myself. That would be illegal. It would cost me my job. But I can tell you how to file properly. I can tell you which specific forms to use, which codes to cite so they can't be easily dismissed. The system is designed to be confusing. I can at least make sure you're asking in a way they have to answer. She wouldn't be my co-conspirator, but she would be my guide. She was my inside woman, whether she knew the full extent of my plan or not. That afternoon, she emailed me a list of document codes and procedural statutes. It was a roadmap. Armed with Frank's strategy and Maria's roadmap, I filed my first round of requests. I typed them up, printed them out, and mailed them via certified letter, return receipt requested. 1 copy to the benefits office, 1 copy to the county clerk, 1 copy to the head county commissioner's office, just so they knew someone was watching. Then I started a spreadsheet, columns for request date, expected response, document type, and notes. I created folders on my computer. I was an auditor again. The hunt was on. Weeks turned into a month. The first responses were predictable. Form letters citing the need for a 30-day extension, legal boilerplate. but they couldn't delay forever. The first real package of documents arrived on a rainy Tuesday. It was a thick manila envelope from the county. My heart hammered in my chest as I sliced it open. It was the vendor payment list, hundreds of pages of payments. Most of it was mundane: office supplies, software licenses, utility bills. But I wasn't looking for the mundane. I was looking for the crooked numbers. I brewed a pot of coffee, sat down at my kitchen table, and began to read, line by tedious line. It took me 2 days, and then I found it. A series of 5 payments, totaling over $75,000, made over the last 18 months, to a company called Design Solutions, LLC. The memo line for each payment was the same: office renovation and upgrades. A $75,000 renovation for a small satellite office of the county benefits department. That was a red flag the size of a circus tent. I did a quick online search for Design Solutions, LLC. The company had a bare-bones website with stock photos and little information, but the state's corporate registry was public record. It listed the name of the sole registered agent, a man named Robert Fuller. The name meant nothing to me, but a little more digging, a few searches through public social media profiles, and I found the connection. Robert Fuller was Mr. Hayes's brother-in-law. His wife's maiden name was Hayes. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, grim smile spreading across my face. This wasn't just a slush fund. It was a family business. The chickens were coming home to roost. This was the first move, the first thread I could pull that would unravel everything. My silent takeover of the information war had begun. The first batch of documents was a gold mine, but it was just the foundation. The payments to Hayes's brother-in-law were damning, but circumstantial. I needed more. I needed to connect the slush fund directly to the lavish spending. With the vendor lists in hand, I cross-referenced the dates. The largest payment to Design Solutions, LLC was made in early April. I went back to my notes on the denied benefits. The week before that payment went out, there had been a massive spike in denial letters. Arthur Henderson and 5 others had been rejected in the same 3-day period. The money from their denied benefits was almost certainly used to pay that invoice. They weren't just funding a renovation, they were funding a kickback scheme. The second key discovery came from the departmental travel budget records, which arrived a week later. They were heavily redacted, with black lines striking through most of the juicy details. But they couldn't redact everything. They had to list the destination and the purpose of the trip. There it was, 3 times in the last year, a mandatory management training conference. The destinations: Las Vegas, Orlando, a high-end resort in Scottsdale. I recognized the names of the hotels. These weren't places you went for budget training seminars. These were luxury vacation spots. And the attendees: M. Hayes and 2 of his deputies. Always the same 3 names. The dates of these trips were the real tell. The Las Vegas conference was in late September. I checked my files. In the 2 weeks leading up to it, a dozen applications had been denied for incomplete forms. The Orlando trip in February was preceded by another wave of denials. He wasn't just using the fund. He was actively generating the money he needed for his junkets by clearing out applications. It was a perverse, predatory cycle. He wasn't just a thief. He was a hunter. It was time for the second round of FOIA requests. This time I was going for the throat. I drafted 3 new letters. The first was to the benefits office, asking for the specific, itemized invoices from Design Solutions, LLC, detailing the work performed. The second was for the unredacted travel expense reports and itemized receipts for the Las Vegas and Orlando conferences. The third, and most pointed, was a request for the complete transaction ledger for the unclaimed benefits reclamation account I had learned about from George Petroselli's letter. I was no longer asking if the account existed. I was asking to see its contents, and this time I added 2 new names to the CC line of the letter: the Honorable Judge Miller of the County Oversight Committee, and Sarah Jenkins, an investigative reporter at the local paper, whose work I admired. I wanted Hayes to know that I wasn't just some cranky old man anymore. I was a cranky old man with an audience. The effect was immediate. My phone rang 2 days later. The caller ID was blocked. "Gregory," a voice said. It was smooth, professional, but with an undercurrent of tension, like a wire pulled too tight. "This is he. This is Michael Hayes from the County Benefits Office. I understand you've been filing some records requests. I just wanted to reach out personally and see if I could help clear up any confusion you might have about our procedures." It was him, the man himself. He was trying to sound helpful, like a friendly neighborhood public servant, but I could hear what he was really doing. He was probing. He was trying to figure out who I was, what I knew, and how much of a threat I represented. I decided to play the part he expected. "Oh, Mr. Hayes. Yes, thank you for calling. It's all just so complicated, you know. I'm just an old volunteer trying to make sense of it all for my friends at the senior center." Of course, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "And we appreciate the work you do. But sometimes these documents can be misleading without the proper context. I'd be happy to have one of my people walk you through our budget, to show you how we are, in fact, excellent stewards of the public trust." He was trying to manage me, to pull me inside his tent where he could control the narrative. I wasn't about to fall for it. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Hayes," I said, keeping my voice mild. "But I prefer to read the documents myself. I find the source material is always the most enlightening. I'll be sure to let you know if I have any specific questions after I've reviewed the invoices and the travel receipts I requested." There was a pause on the line. I had just told him I knew exactly what to look for. The friendly tone in his voice evaporated. "Those requests can take some time to process, you understand. We have staffing issues," he said. The words clipped. "Oh, I understand completely," I replied, allowing a hint of steel into my own voice. "That's why I copied Judge Miller in the press. I figured it might help expedite the process. Public transparency is so important, don't you think?" The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could practically hear the panic setting in. He had thought he was a ghost, operating in the shadows of the bureaucracy. I had just turned on a searchlight. He hung up without another word. The silent takeover was over. The war was now out in the open. The weeks after that phone call were a strange mix of silence and escalating pressure. The senior center, my haven, began to feel haunted. The empty chair where Arthur Henderson used to hold court during his poker games was a constant glaring reminder of what was at stake. Eleanor Gable had moved in with her daughter an hour away, but her daughter worked full-time, and Eleanor would call me sometimes just to have someone to talk to. Her voice was smaller, more distant. She told me she felt like a burden. Each of these conversations was like another log on the fire of my resolve. This wasn't just about spreadsheets and invoices anymore. This was a rescue mission. My community was being dismantled, person by Hayes's callous greed. The power for so long had been entirely his, the power of the pen, the rubber stamp, the official denial. But now, a different kind of power was coalescing on my kitchen table, the power of facts. Hayes, predictably, went into full defensive mode. My new, more pointed requests were met with a wall of procedural delays. I received a formal letter stating that my request for invoices was under legal review for proprietary contractor information. Another stated that the travel receipts were pending an internal audit. It was nonsense, and we both knew it. He was trying to run out the clock, hoping I would lose interest or simply give up. He underestimated me. An auditor's greatest virtue is patience. I had spent months, even years, on cases before. I was happy to wait. I knew he was trapped. He couldn't deny the requests outright, not with a judge and a reporter watching. He could only delay. Then he made his first critical mistake. It came from Sarah, my guide at the county clerk's office. She called me on a burner phone she'd bought. Her voice trembling. "Gregory, something's happened," she whispered. "Mr. Hayes's department just put a blanket freeze on all external records requests. They're citing a comprehensive policy review. They're shutting it down." My boss is furious, says it's an overreach of authority, but Hayes's office is claiming it's a matter of protecting personal information. He was trying to lock the door to the vault, but it was what she said next that made my ears perk up. But before the freeze went into effect, one of your requests got partially fulfilled. The system processed it automatically before the manual override. It's just one document, one invoice. It's not much. Which one? I asked, my heart starting to beat a little faster. It was one of the invoices from that design company, the one for the last payment. An hour later, I had a PDF in my email inbox, sent from an anonymous public library account. It was the final invoice from Design Solutions LLC for $15,000. The description of work was vague. Finalization of audio-visual and executive suite upgrades. But attached, likely by a clerk who didn't know any better, was the itemized equipment list. I scanned the list, a conference table, 12 leather chairs, a whiteboard, and then at the bottom of the list was the mistake. The beautiful, fatal, arrogant mistake. One Sony 85-inch 4K Ultra HD LED Smart TV. One Sonos Arc Premium Smart Soundbar with Dolby Atmos. And one PlayStation 5 gaming console with 2 DualSense controllers. This wasn't office equipment. This was a man cave. Hayes hadn't just renovated his office. He'd used public funds, money stripped from the elderly and vulnerable, to build himself a home theater and a gaming den right in his government office. He was so arrogant, so certain he was untouchable, that he put it in writing. I printed the invoice and laid it on my table next to the travel records and the list of denied benefits. The picture was complete. This was the murder weapon. Hayes had tried to slam the door shut, but his own sloppiness had left the keys hanging in the lock. The power had well and truly shifted. He just didn't know it yet. The confrontation, when it came, was not what you might expect. I'm not a man for shouting matches or dramatic showdowns. An auditor doesn't win by yelling. An auditor wins by presenting a case so complete, so thoroughly documented, and so utterly damning that the other side has no choice but to fold. My battlefield was not a conference room, it was a binder. I spent the next 3 days in a state of focused, almost meditative work. I took all my evidence, the denial letters, the timeline of rejections, the vendor lists, the corporate records for Hayes's brother-in-law, the redacted travel vouchers and the crown jewel, the home theater invoice, and I assembled it into a single comprehensive dossier. I used tab dividers, cross-referencing every claim with a supporting document. The first tab was a 1-page executive summary, outlining the entire scheme. The second tab was a list of the victims, with the dates of their denials. The third detailed the suspicious payments to Design Solutions LLC. The fourth laid out the timeline of the Las Vegas and Orlando trips, perfectly aligned with the spikes in denials. The final tab contained the invoice for the PlayStation. It was, if I may say so myself, a masterpiece of bureaucratic warfare. It was cold, factual, and undeniable. It told a story of corruption not with adjectives, but with dates, names, and numbers. When I was finished, I made 3 identical copies. I did not call Mr. Hayes. I did not call the newspaper. I called the local field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. When the operator asked my purpose, I was very specific. I said, I have credible documented evidence of public corruption regarding the misuse of federal housing funds by a county official. They gave me an appointment for the following afternoon. I walked into the sterile, quiet lobby of the federal building feeling strangely calm. I was on home turf, in a way. I'd spent my life in buildings just like this one. A young agent, clean-cut and sharp-eyed, with a nameplate that read Agent Miller, led me to a small, windowless interview room. He was polite but had the professionally skeptical air of a man who had listened to his fair share of crackpot theories. "So, Mr. Gregory," he said, opening a notepad, "you believe there's some misconduct at the county benefits office." I didn't say a word. I simply placed one of my binders on the table between us and pushed it toward him. "I don't believe it, son," I said quietly. "I've audited it." He opened the binder to the first page, the executive summary. He read it, his expression unchanging. Then he flipped to the second tab, the list of names. He paused on Arthur Henderson's name. He flipped to the third tab, the invoices. He lingered on the corporate filing for Hayes's brother-in-law. His pen, which had been poised over his notepad, was now resting on the table. He wasn't taking notes anymore. He was just reading. By the time he got to the travel vouchers for Las Vegas, he looked up at me, his skepticism completely gone, replaced by a look of intense focus. "Where did you get all this?" he asked, his voice low. "Public records," I said. "Mostly." An old man with a lot of time on his hands can be very persistent. He flipped to the final tab and saw the invoice for the television and the PlayStation 5. He stared at it for a full 10 seconds, then slowly shook his head and let out a short, sharp laugh of disbelief. He closed the binder. "Mr. Gregory," he said, leaning forward, "you've done most of our job for us." He stood up. "Excuse me for a moment." He was gone for 5 minutes. When he returned, he was with an older woman, another agent who had the weary, intelligent eyes of a veteran. He introduced her as his supervisor. "This is the gentleman I told you about," Miller said to her. "To me," he said, "would you be willing to walk my supervisor through your findings?" For the next hour, I did just that. I presented my case, just as I had in the old days, calmly and factually. I was no longer a volunteer at a senior center. I was a federal auditor giving a final briefing. When I was done, the supervisor, Agent Sterling, looked at me. "You've built an incredibly thorough case, Mr. Gregory," she said. "This is a prosecutable offense. Wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. This is serious." She tapped the binder. "May we keep this?" "That's why I brought it," I said. A new reality was dawning, and it was a reality I had built, piece by piece, from my quiet little kitchen table. The fallout came 2 weeks later. It was the lead story on the 6 o'clock news. The camera showed federal agents carrying boxes out of the county benefits office. And then there he was, Michael Hayes, in handcuffs, being led to an unmarked car. The smooth, condescending arrogance was gone. He just looked small, pale, and utterly shocked, his face a mask of disbelief. The world he had so carefully constructed had just been demolished. The news report detailed the whole scheme, the slush fund from unclaimed benefits, the kickbacks to his brother-in-law, the lavish trips disguised as training. They even mentioned the PlayStation. The anchor called it a story of brazen greed and a shocking betrayal of public trust. I just called it balancing the books. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The county government, embarrassed and under federal scrutiny, moved fast. The unclaimed benefits reclamation fund was immediately frozen. An emergency task force was created to review every single application denied by Hayes over the past 3 years. The 2 deputies who went on the trips with him were fired and faced their own charges. The whole rotten structure came crashing down. Back at the Northwood Senior Center, the change was palpable. The cloud of fear and despair had lifted, replaced by a cautious, growing sense of hope. I was busier than ever, but this time, the work was joyful. I was helping my friends refile their applications, and the task force, eager to show progress, was approving them in record time. One of the first approvals was for Eleanor Gable. The county not only reinstated her benefits, but also provided back payments and assistance in securing a new apartment in a newly built senior living complex, just a few blocks from the center. I went with her to see it. It was bright, clean, and had a small balcony perfect for her potted plants. She stood in the middle of the empty living room, her hands clasped to her chest, and this time she was crying, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She gave me a hug so fierce it nearly knocked the wind out of me. "Thank you, Greg," she whispered into my shoulder. "You gave me back my home." A few weeks after that, I got a call from a familiar voice. It was Arthur Henderson. His son had seen the news story online. The county had contacted him, apologized profusely, and offered to not only approve his housing, but also to cover his moving expenses if he wanted to return. "So it looks like you're stuck with me after all," he chuckled over the phone. "I'll be back in town next month. Hope you've been practicing your chess game. I owe you a rematch. The center started to feel like its old self again. The poker games resumed. The chatter returned. The mail cart was no longer a source of dread. Life was flowing back into the spaces that despair had hollowed out. They called me a quiet man, and I suppose I am. I'm not one for grand speeches or bold declarations, but quiet doesn't mean blind, and it certainly doesn't mean weak. All my life, I've believed that the world runs on details. A signature on a form, a date on an invoice, a number in a ledger. Most people ignore them. They see them as boring, insignificant, but they're not. They add up. They tell a story. You just have to be patient enough to read it. This whole affair, it wasn't about revenge. Not in the end. It was about accounts. It was about making sure the books were balanced, not just in a government ledger, but in the lives of good people. Some people embezzle money. People like Hayes, they embezzle something far more valuable: dignity, security, and peace of mind. And I firmly believe that all accounts, no matter how long they've been neglected, eventually come due. I was just the auditor sent to collect. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt overlooked or powerless, I hope my experience shows you that one person paying close attention can still make a world of difference. Please take a moment to like this video if you found it meaningful, and subscribe to the channel for more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And please share your own experiences in the comments below. Reading your stories reminds all of us that we are not alone.